Do you need a web application security solution that can improve your detection rate and enable easier remediation? Acunetics has a fully automated solution that can detect and report over 4,500 web vulnerabilities. Fast and scalable, it can scan thousands of pages without interruption, including HTML5, JavaScript, and single-page applications. Acunetics provides accuracy with the lowest false positives by combining black box and white box testing. For more information, visit acunetics.com/Security Week.
Welcome back, everyone, for the application security news for the week of January 13th. Before we get started, one quick announcement. If you are interested in quality over quantity and having meaningful conversations instead of just a badge scan, join us April 1st to the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Use the registration code OscarSierra19-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or world pass. So with that, Paul, I don't know, did you catch this lapse in security at NASA? This was kind of scary if you actually read through the article, because they had their bug databases basically publicly facing to the internet.
No, I did not see. Which one is this now?
Story number 1 under bugs, breaches, and more. This one, it's like the worst possible scenario that you could have imaginable. So Jira, which a lot of companies and organizations clearly use, like NASA, for tracking work and running projects and fixing bugs. Well, as it turns out, they had some Jira instances that allowed for users to log in without a password. In fact, it allowed anyone to log in without a password. So, as one might imagine, especially if it's facing the internet, a researcher found it and privately reported it to them. Interestingly, they do have a HackerOne bug bounty program, but NASA never got back to this researcher who privately reported it to them to let them know, hey, by the way, you got this thing standing out open to the internet. So yeah, it's just kind of like, can you imagine you're NASA? You've got all these, interesting projects you're working on, some of which, who knows, could be classified. And now it's just out on the internet for anybody.
That's great. So their Jira instance was exposed. Is that the gist of it?
One of them anyway. Yeah. So they probably have several. If
Sure.
Being NASA as big as it is, you would think that they probably have at least a few instances. But yeah, so they had at least one server publicly facing to the internet. Basically, the researcher contacted NASA and CERT-CC. So that's the Computer Emergency Response Team. I don't know what CC stands for. It might have been the Carnegie Mellon University specific one. But that's at least what they cite in the article.
I'm hung up on the CRLF injection into PHP's curl options, as I just installed this library on a server last week.
Oh, great. Well, Paul, you're in for a real treat. So carriage return line feed injection is what CRLF is in this case. So usually it's the sort of thing that people will do with things like, I don't know, logs, etc., right? But in this case, what it was is there's a library that allows you to go ahead and pass commands or run commands that what in this case it did. It was a kind of like a trial groups thing that they were doing. So the code itself was intended for A/B testing. So it sounds like this might have been like a custom set of code itself, but ultimately what they ended up doing was the trial groups were intended to allow for, 1%, 5%, 10% of the user-based population to have the new code released to them, so they could see, okay, do we get latency problems? Do we get more click-throughs on that one new widget that we put in? So in any event, the get public data method on an internal JSON API using the curl library is ultimately where the problem lay for them. Because what happens here is it had no input validation, and it would take the URL encoded sequences, so like %0 delta or %0 alpha, inside of a cookie value. And from there, you could do some interesting things. Now, as they do talk about in this article itself, you could, in fact, include like an extra header just to, throw an additional header in there. But cookies and headers not a huge deal from a vulnerability standpoint. One of the interesting things, though, that they did find was you could craft your own JSON post data, and then basically what you would do is you would get the length of the data in bytes using a single carriage return line feed sequence, inject a content length header that instructs the server to only read that number of bytes. And then if you inject two carriage return line feed sequences and then your malicious JSON as the post data, it would actually post the data that it was supposed to allow for. And it's the curl opt is what it looks like is the functionality that they were using. So yeah, not great. And if you just installed it last week, Paul, you might want to go look at that, maybe.
Is there a fix for this, or?
So input validation is ultimately going to be your save here. Is basically whatever you're allowing for input that's going to be called by your PHP code. Make sure you're sanitizing it first. So if it's supposed to allow for, I don't know, alpha characters, dashes, and periods, make sure it's not including any spaces, percents, or numbers, for example.
Gotcha.
Because part of this is the whole URL encoding thing, right? So if they were using %0 alpha and %0 delta, the URL encoding is going to be read or decoded by PHP automatically. So you know what the bad characters should be. But again, blacklist options are always a bad idea because there's always a bypass out there somewhere for it. So at the end of the day, input validation with inputs that you should be allowing and sequences that you should be allowing is ultimately going to be your best bet. Now, the other side of this that I usually go beyond kind of the normal input validation and say you should also limit the number of characters you're allowing for input. And that's not just because it's a smart thing to do, because if a person puts 1 million zeros in there, it could eat up disk space. But at the same time, you have a reasonable level of expectation as to how long a name should be, or how long a phone number is. And what is consisting of a name or a phone number or an address. So to that end, it's usually why, for example, whenever you fill out an address inside of, I don't know, like a form field on a website, right? It's usually different fields. The reason is because they don't want you to be able to include a carriage return line feed for a block text of your address, because now it's reading carriage return line feeds.
Right.
So
interesting.
Yeah, this one was thing. And it came out, gosh, let's see here. This was August 1st was the initial posting of this. Don't know if this has been fixed yet as of not, but I recently saw this pop back up and I thought, this is not something I saw last year anywhere really highlighted. So maybe we should talk about it.
Yeah, it's good. I know another one that I covered very briefly was systemd had an exploit. And my only comment was that I miss init.
Yeah. I mean, this one was, so I didn't get too deep into it, admittedly. Systemd is one of those things that's easy for people to hate on. In fact, my favorite quote from the article that I cited here was, Systemd is described in the system as producing a monumental increase in complexity, a slap in the face to the Unix philosophy, and its inherent domineering and viral nature turns into something akin to a second kernel. And I think that they really hit it spot on there.
I agree. It captured my feelings on it, other than I missed init, right? I think a lot of us that have been doing Unix and Linux for some time now certainly miss init and have looked at some of those. And systemd has had other vulnerability. I think there was one point out last year or the year before was another systemd.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're not wrong. There's been a systemd vulnerability now for, any given year, right? You throw a dartboard at a calendar with years on it and they'll have a systemd.
Somewhere out there's a developer going, I've got a better way, and is coming up with a whole new startup process that in 5 years will be adopted by every single Linux distribution just to piss us off.
It'll be like sysinitd is what it'll be. I should go register that site, sysinitd.com.
Should. It's the next thing.
Someone goes and does it right now. So anyhow, the interesting thing that I found...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say the other story that I thought you were transitioning, but Amazon Ring security cameras, I have...
We should talk about that.
I have a couple of Rings, and it doesn't matter that the batteries are out because it's footage that they've captured. already.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it. Trust me. The last thing I'll say about the sysinit. See, I've moved on. The systemd vulnerability is that the CVE 2018-16865 and 16866, using those vulnerabilities, they were able to obtain a local root shell in 10 minutes on an i386 and 70 minutes in an AMD 64 architecture on average. So yeah, not great by any stretch of the imagination. Nope. And by the way, patching, systemd, probably not going to be fun or easy. So thank God for the cloud and being able to just like burn it all down and rebuild it, because you're going to have to do that probably. So yes, let's talk about Ring for a moment, Paul. So last year, I don't recall exactly which article it was, but I definitely included an article in one of the episodes last year where we talked about the fact that companies were using people to augment their AI service because their AI wasn't there yet. So they were just paying, effectively cheap labor to do their work for them. Well, lo and behold, Ring, now, owned by Amazon, were doing exactly that. With their operations in Ukraine. So, by the way, Paul, all your camera footage is probably now in the hands of Russia. Just,
it's true.
Think about that.
That's what I gathered from this article, Keith.
Yeah, and it was really interesting, right? Because just highlighting a couple of quotes here. So their CEO, Jamie Siminoff, says, "Our mission to reduce crime in neighborhoods has been at the core of everything we do at Ring." And then he, of course, reported the $1 billion acquisition payday from Amazon. But the thing that's really sad about this is that only a Ring customer's email address was required to watch cameras from that person's home from the resource or the admin panel that they were actually leveraging for this, which is like no authentication. I don't even know what kind of logging they had on this. And all they needed was your email address, which, by the way, for public personas is probably pretty easy to find. Yeah, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. And at the same time, I was like, oh, yeah, it's exactly as we said last year, which is AI, as much as a lot of people seem to talk about machine learning and artificial intelligence, most of the time is just currently being augmented by people to, as they train the algorithm, but not really train the algorithm, just train more people. In fact, one of the things I loved about this article, Paul, is they had a job posting listing for vacant video tagging gigs where you must be able to recognize and tag all moving objects in the video correctly with high accuracy.
It's crazy.
It sounds like real intelligence to me.
The article is somewhat sensationalized, I would say, Keith, in really picking on Ring as having lax security, when in fact, if you look at the IoT providers, Ring is actually pretty strong in terms of its software security, but seems to have fallen down on maybe some of their privacy and or internal policies that are allowing access to customers. Although at the end of the article, if you go all the way down, it does say that Ring said that they do not give employees access to customers' video. But, again, The Intercept has sources that contradict that claim. Yeah.
So I will agree with you on the software aspect, especially their ability to update the security of the device itself. They had an issue where I believe they pushed a patch out within a few hours of a vulnerability being made public, and so be it. Which I would applaud them for that wholeheartedly, right? And it's interesting because there's a lot of debate back and forth between the whole idea of privacy versus security and how they're kind of in the same camp. They're kind of like cousins, right? They don't necessarily live in the same space, but they're often owned by the same groups of people, for lack of a better term. So this, to me, it was one of those things where, by the way, Facebook and Google and a whole lots of other people are trying to put video in your home, and it only makes you wonder who has access to those things. So yeah, I don't even know where to get started with this other than to say, this is why I don't generally have IoT in my household, for exactly this reason. That's just me. I'm paranoid. So anything more you wanted to say about that story, Paul? Because I did want to cover the whole Google window. So it was interesting reading this article. Google applied to the Federal Communications Commission to be able to get a waiver on operating SOLI or SOLI sensors at higher powered levels than were previously allowed for. What was interesting to me in this article is Facebook initially came out raising concerns that it could interrupt or in some way disrupt other bands or coexistence of other technologies in the same kind of ecosystem, like the household, for example. But it seems like Google and Facebook jointly told the FCC in September that they agreed that the sensors could operate at higher than currently allowed power levels without interference, but lower than what was otherwise previously asked for by Google. The video in this, which I thought was really great, so this is story number 1 under If You Build It, They Will Come, was actually kind of neat. So effectively, a Soli sensor would sit something like in your screen, for example, and it acts like radar. So it can read depth in space, and it would allow you to do things like, I don't know, move your hand in front of the screen and be able to get the mouse to move or the pages to change, or scrolling up and down by just kind of like rubbing your fingers together like a violin. It was just very, very interesting how they all like showed the demo of it. And in my mind, like this plus virtual reality or even augmented reality is what gets us to Ghost in the Shell. Like the invisible screens that are out in front of you that you can just kind of like quote unquote touch, even though you're not really touching them. This is it. It
makes me feel like I can use the Force, but not really. That's what.
Yes, it's kind of like the auto opening doors when you go to the shopping mall. Same thing.
Yes.
So, so yeah, this was kind of a cool article, and I thought, I can only imagine programming for depth in space, like this Z-axis side of things, will get really interesting for the developer minds out there. But I don't know, I kind of welcome it, but at the same time thinking like, okay, Google not only like might have a camera in my home, but now they have radar in my home, and like, what can they do with that? Like the implications of the data that could be mined off of radar waves in your household is really scary and kind of interesting all at once. So
the difference between a geek and a dork is, right?
Nope.
A geek thinks it's really cool if there are doors that automatically open and look like the ones that are on Star Trek. A dork makes the noise when they go through.
Duly noted. That explains a lot about walking through doors with you.
Yes, it could.
I get it. I am there. So anyway, now that we've totally derailed. Speaking of geeks and dorks, Paul, GitHub now is giving free users unlimited private repositories. This is kind of awesome.
So wait, my question is, if you had you needed a paid account to have any private repository before? Is that true?
Yep. So they had as low as I think it was $7 a month. You could get unlimited private repos.
So is like my account free now? Are they?
So no, you would have to go back and change your actual like billing cycle to the free account. Interestingly, if you go out to like, I don't know, my account, so github.com/andmyhacks, you'll see it has like a little pro star underneath like my name and my little hand, which I thought was kind of cool, because with pro you do get a number of tools that I think are some of the additional things, like, okay, you want to have a wiki for your repo in addition to the repo itself, and some of the other.
Oh wait, are tools. The projects in the paid account?
I think so.
Okay, I would imagine
that for sure. There were a couple of things that were related to that. I think projects
probably, because we use the projects ones internally now to track all bugs and feature requests for internal software. So
yeah, and it's, I mean, honestly,
for $7 a month for as many users as you want, right? I think that's pretty good.
So the like enterprise model, like the business model, I think is $25 a month up to 5 users.
Gotcha.
But even still, the $7 one, you can invite collaborators without any sort of additional charge. That's pretty great. The private free repos, you can only have up to 3 collaborators. So it's not good for businesses per se. But it's still, I thought this was kind of cool, honestly. I was like, hey, this is awesome. One of the things they do cite, though, in the article was, it gave me a little bit of pause, which is the question of if this will harm GitHub's culture of shameless openness and candidness, because people can now effectively hide their half complete projects into perpetuity without ever releasing them. So
true.
I don't know. There's something to that, but I think it's the right move, and it definitely will get more people on GitHub, even though there were probably, anybody out there doing open source was already on GitHub to some extent anyway, I imagine.
I really like the project aspect of GitHub. It works really well. I wish more people would use it. I think if you got a free account, it may explain some of the features and roadmaps that are non-existent, feature roadmaps. Because it's nice to be able to track it, that way. and prioritize it as well, which is what the project thing gives you. So
Definitely.
you get the to-do, doing, done, multiple to-dos with multiple priorities. Was new for us in 2019 to really manage it, and I like it a lot. And it's included in your plan.
Right. And that's one of the things is like, for me, I've always loved just tracking things in there for all of my personal projects. It's like, okay, cool. Like, what am I doing next? And what do I need to care about? And what's that note that I know I'm just going to forget about if I don't go back and touch on it later? So I've loved it personally. And that's why I'm continuing with the paid model, because I'm like, cool, I use all those things and I want them. And $7 a month is, you know, it's good. What here, like $84 a year, not a big deal. So at least for me, I'm privileged enough to be able to pay for GitHub and not have to worry about breaking the bank. So I will say that. I do want to talk about a couple of the learning and tools, Paul, because there were a couple of really cool ones in there.
Oh yeah, the distroless Docker containers. How does that work?
Yes, this one I didn't get deep into the weeds on exactly how it worked, but effectively Google's container tools. So that's the GitHub account, Google Container Tools. It is under Learning and Tools number 3, distroless Docker containers. This was neat because effectively what they've done is they've taken the namespace of what is normally inside the Docker container and stripped out like absolutely everything except for the bare bones minimum things that you need to actually run your application, including things like the shell. Like your entry point effectively is going to be different because by default, distroless images do not contain a shell.
That was just awesome. Super cool for me. I thought that was awesome. I like it.
Yeah. So this is it. The other, I mean, the goal behind this ultimately is to be able to make your containers completely portable, right? Because they should be able to go on anything if they have no official distro. It's not like you have to worry about, well, where's my Alpine Linux version of XYZ so that I can run this Docker container? It's no. This is literally like my application. That's it. So that was number 3 under Learning and Tools. The other one that I thought was really cool, and I mean to have him come on the show at some point, was We45. So Abhay Bhargav, who I met at AppSec Day Australia, put up a cool little playground called Damn Vulnerable Functions as a Service, or DVFAAS. So it's We and then the numerals 45 on GitHub. It's number 2 under Learning and Tools. If you're trying to get into serverless and you want to learn a little bit about vulnerable serverless functions, this is pretty awesome. Now, you do have to stand up your own architecture. So it's intended to be on AWS, for example, and you do actually have to spin it up to play with it. But to that end, if you want to go play with attacking serverless architecture, which, by the way, is going to be a thing very soon, this is the way to do it. And I thought that this was really cool. It was just a nice way to open source things and have fun with things like XXE, for example, or injection attacks, or insecure deserialization, which probably is going to be happening all over the place. So people should learn how to hack that. I thought this was cool. And with that, I know that we do have our commit strip as well, by the way, for the week. Paul, did you check this out?
I did not.
So for story number 3 under food for thought, for our listeners, go check it out. Basically, if you've ever worked with developers of any kind, I'm sure you've probably had the conversation that they're having in this comic. You'll laugh, you'll cry, and then you'll want to shut your computer. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git, commit, and stay classy.